Welcome to the First Nations Health Managers Association's weekly town hall with your host, Marion Crow, your resource for COVID-19 related news and information. Send us your questions to fnhma@ihtoday.ca. Over the next hour, you'll hear from health professionals and Indigenous community leaders. As always, we have reliable and credible information for you and your community. We want to hear from you.
Tansei from the home of NationTalk in Toronto, home of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Huron, the Wendat people. I can't thank you enough for allowing us into your territories, your nations. It's an incredible show lined up for you in this hour. We're going to take you back of the COVID waves. We're going to show you the amazing work. We're going to be strong, resilient, and celebrate being Indigenous. I can't believe that it's been 49 shows of FNHMA COVID-19 town halls. Let's reflect back together where we're going to see what has happened during COVID-19, walk you through some of those historical milestones, tell you the stats in an epi fashion. We're going to celebrate the resilience of all of the people working tirelessly in our communities, nations, and organizations, keeping us safe. I certainly hope you get to take a reprieve, get a break, recharge, and of course, our thoughts and prayers for all of the children whispering, they found us, we get to go home. When you are wearing orange, buying orange, make sure you check that the proceeds are going to the Indigenous organizations that they're meant to. So buy Indigenous, but make sure that those proceeds are in fact going to the orange shirt. And I proudly wear my orange today in honor and recognition. Now, I want you to know that we have a whole bunch of amazing certified First Nation health managers within the First Nation Health Manager Association organization. And today, you're going to see across the bottom of your screens all of the names in our way to thank you for being strong, proud FNHMA certified members for achieving that designation. And you will be showcased at the bottom of our screen today for the full hour. Oh, I've got goosebumps. I'm scared. And I'm just grateful that I have my sisters with me, my sisters in health. This is an all Indigenous ladies show coming to you today. How amazing is this? I've seen so many women step up during this pandemic and lead us so strongly, and I couldn't have done this, and FNHMA couldn't have done this without our partners like Dr. Valerie Gideon at Indigenous Services Canada, like Dr. Carol Hopkins at the Thunderbird Partnership Foundation, and like Dr. Brenda Restool, First Peoples Wellness Circle. We started together and we are going to ride this together on this final show. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Valerie Gideon to the Crow's Nest for a final reflection. Come on in, Val.
Thank you very much, Marion, and thank you to all the First Nations health managers across the country for their incredible courage throughout all of these months. And I do, of course, want to start by acknowledging that I'm on the traditional unceded Algonquin Nation territory, and I want to acknowledge the very, very challenging times that many people are still going through. particularly with the confirmations of unmarked graves in Kamloops and in Saskatchewan as well, and others that are coming in the next weeks and months and years. I am Mi'kmaq from the Gaspé First Nation in the Quebec region, and I have spent my career working in Indigenous health, primarily First Nations health. So I certainly can recognize the incredible leadership that First Nations health managers have demonstrated, as well as all of their colleagues and First Nations leaders across the country, as well as experts and others. I've been asked by my colleague Marion to speak about a bit of an overview of what's taken place over the last number of months with respect to the pandemic. I'll do my best to keep it very short, as I have about 10 minutes. I'm not going to be able to do full justice to all of the efforts and also the losses that people have suffered, which we also have to recognize that there are many people that are grieving because of the impacts of the pandemic, or that are experiencing challenges in their own lives from mental health or family relationships, social impacts, economic impacts. And we also don't want to take that lightly, and recognize that it will take many months and years to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. Alors, je veux vous remercier. Je vais demander aux diapositives d'être mises sur l'écran. So I'll just ask for the graphs. And I would like to acknowledge that these graphics that you will see in a moment actually were produced by the First Nations Health Managers Association as one of their amazing pieces of work that they have done throughout through their info desk service. So starting from January, and I won't go month by month, I don't want to scare you, but in January, February, I actually had an opportunity to attend the first face-to-face meeting of health emergency coordinators across our department's regional offices and the BC First Nations Health Authority and other First Nations health authorities. That meeting was actually facilitated by Dr. Hopkins, Dr. Stool, actually, because the goal was to ensure that First Nations health emergency planning would consider mental health impacts and the broader First Nations mental wellness continuum framework. That was an important milestone because we talked about COVID. We talked about what was coming, and that was before a global pandemic had been declared. We talked about things like the influence of social media, which was something that we did not have to deal with during, or at the same scale, during the H1N1 pandemic. We talked about the importance of fighting to ensure that First Nations would be prioritized in the national COVID response. So there was foresight in the planning, and First Nations, we were happy that at least we had received some funding at that time from Budget 2019 for the first time for First Nations health emergency planning that could include mental health. And that helped us to have a much more solid foundation, although there were still gaps, but a more solid foundation than we would have had otherwise. In March of 2020, when the declaration of a global pandemic came, we had the first First Nations Health Managers Association town hall. We did it within, I would say, 2 weeks of the declaration or so, and it was important to ensure that we prioritized communication. And we also were briefing on a daily basis parliamentarians, we were briefing ministers. We started to brief the Chiefs Committee on Health of the Assembly of First Nations on a weekly basis. And our regional offices were having daily calls with First Nations across each of the provinces and territories to make sure that they were plugged into the latest information. We set up a specific working group under the National Advisory Committee on Immunization for remote and northern communities to consider what those impacts would be with experts and provincial territorial representatives, as well as, of course, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis representatives at that time. That was critical to use the existing partnership tables to leverage the networks that First Nations had in place at all levels, at the leadership level and at the technical level, to make sure that we would be able to be as responsive as possible. And we started to see funding flow as early as March and April of that time. And I'd like to point out that to date, $5.9 billion has been invested specific to supporting Indigenous people and communities in the context of the pandemic. We didn't start with the close to $6 billion, but the funding has been consistent with respect to access to those resources across the time frame. And that was also very important so that communities were able to respond and also submit additional requests for funding to meet needs. In terms of health human resources, we've deployed 417 surge capacity nurses and 238 paramedics. That's as of last week. 1,835 PPE requests from Indigenous communities and organizations were responded to by our department. That doesn't even factor in all the PPE purchasing and distribution that First Nations have done themselves, with funding support. Health infrastructure. We might remember, the first press conference or press event on this. People were asking about tents and field hospitals. And at the time, people were questioning why that would even be contemplated. Well, I can say that 660 solutions have been funded, 459 temporary structures, and 53 temporary structures are still in stockpile in 3 of the provinces. We have made incredible use of those spaces in varying ways, including adapting community spaces for isolation and extra space for assessment and testing purposes, as well as accommodation of additional professionals. Communities very rapidly started to close their borders. They knew that they needed to restrict access to their community and they needed to protect their community members. And even as of last week, we still had 431 communities that had some form of community closure. Testing. The incredible amount of deployment of testing, from initially swab testing to then rapid testing mechanisms, 176 gene expert machines, 229 Abbott ID machines, and 2,022 Pambios have been deployed across First Nations communities. The first wave, we didn't see any outbreaks in long-term care facilities on reserve. Unfortunately, that changed in the second wave. In the first wave, we had lower incidence rates, we had lower hospitalization and fatality rates in the first wave. And now I'll ask for the next timeline slide to come up. But then we started to see spikes in wave 2 and spikes that continued in wave 3. Primarily significant impact in the prairie provinces. And I would say that, one of the things that we quickly learned is that unfortunately, the importance of, or not unfortunately, but the importance of provincial governments consulting with First Nations with respect to easing of public health measures and reopenings so that First Nations could put in those additional measures that were required. But the reality is that First Nations community members needed to go out of community to access essential services. And so without being able to really fully control the external environment and sort of what provinces were doing and at what point in time, communities were exposed. And what we've known all along is that they were more vulnerable to the risks associated with infections in community. And so, we were able to support First Nations rapid response teams and measures that they put in place, such as in Manitoba. We were able to bring in the military to provide that additional support to communities that were facing outbreaks, the exhaustion of their local staff, some of them having, or many of them having to isolate because they were exposed to COVID. And we know that there are some infrastructure vulnerabilities in communities, overcrowding, lack of access to community infrastructure that made the situation more precarious, and we needed to act as soon as possible. Our department did put in a National Emergency Operations Center to manage the capacity required in the second wave. But we did start to roll out the vaccine early on in 2021, and that brought hope. Particularly with respect to long-term care centers, we were able to minimize the impacts of outbreaks, although we still saw outbreaks in about 20% of the facilities in First Nations communities or near First Nations communities. We did have a strong vaccine uptake very early on, and with the expansion of vaccine access, particularly with Pfizer being able to be distributed in a more flexible environment, and then the introduction of vaccination for 12 to 17-year-olds has had a very positive impact in communities. We'll go to the next graph on active cases. So as of yesterday, we had 491 First Nations cases on reserve active cases, which is a 90% drop since January of 2021. We've had 3,217 variants of concern cases, primarily in Alberta and Manitoba. But the number of active cases, the curve is bending, particularly in a province like Alberta, where we continue to see the second highest number of active cases, the first being Manitoba. In the territories, there are 135 active cases that are all in the Yukon at the moment. If you turn to the next graph, really the last one, which is about vaccinations, I can report that the news that we had today is that 79.5% of First Nations on reserve and in the territories, individuals 12 and over have received a first dose, and 52% have received their second dose. So that represents a total of 454,191 doses that have been administered on reserve in 6 months. And with the territories factored in, 624,241 doses administered. That's incredible. That is an amazing feat that demonstrates partnership and demonstrates First Nations leadership. But we still have a few things to keep in mind, and I'm wrapping up. Summer festivities and ceremonies, so critically important. We are seeing some leadership put in place pop-up vaccination clinics, and also ensuring that there are public health measures that continue in those settings in a reasonable space. We know that provinces are reopening. Where I live, I'm in a green zone. But we also know that we need to think about the adaptation of guidelines because we continue to see vulnerabilities in communities. And what the Saskatchewan community, for example, has experienced in recent weeks, with a large majority of cases among young people who could not be vaccinated or fully vaccinated, we still have to be cautious. First Nations communities are different in many fantastic, positive ways. But when it comes to COVID, there are vulnerabilities there. So we have to be measured in terms of the reopening plans. We are working with First Nations and others on the proof of vaccination credentials to make sure that we would not be hindered in any way because of things like the lack of internet access. We need to make sure that those processes will be adapted to the reality of communities, and we're working with the Public Health Agency and Immigration on that, and also specific considerations for border communities, which is a big issue, as we know. And then, of course, rolling out of the budget 2021 resources that continue for COVID on a number of fronts so that communities will be able to rely on those resources. We have 200 million out of the Indigenous Community Support Fund that has been rolled out, and another 200 that will come in the fall. And there continues to be funding accessible for communities that have needs-based requests. And finally, I just wanted to note that by the end of July, we will have enough vaccine in Canada to fully vaccinate all Canadians. But I personally am quite grateful that there was recognition that First Nations needed to be prioritized for vaccination, regardless of where they lived in Canada. And that was extremely important to be able to mitigate the impacts of the third wave on our community members. Walaliuk, Marion, for everything that you have done to be able to be a trusted source of information during a time of great vulnerability and misinformation. And thank you very much also, Carol and Brenda, for your continued support and leadership throughout this time.
Wow, the numbers just say so much. Valerie, a heartfelt appreciation for your leadership. It really means a lot when we have an Indigenous leader at the helm of First Nations health services delivery and in our relationships with the Crown. Just undying gratitude. Val, you unpacked so much information in the tiny window we gave you. Why don't you all join me in taking a look back? We put together a montage of some of the topics and guests that have joined the Crow's Nest. Can we pull the montage now, folks? Welcome to the First Nation Health Manager's home here in unceded Algonquin territory in Ottawa. We're really excited to have you all join us via this technology platform. Thank you for allowing us into your territories via technology. So thank you very much, Bienvenue.
And I remember talking to him the next morning after all this had happened. And there was a line there that really stuck with me. He said, Alika, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I've accomplished in my life. When I put on that hospital gown, I'm just another Indian. And that really stuck with me and led to a lot of different conversations about racism and discrimination and bias, and how, because of my role as a physician, he was able to navigate some of those systems. And so what Safe Space does is it's a way to share anonymously your story, and for it to be captured and then combined with other stories so we can discover patterns. And those patterns are then validated through a series of steps and connections within the health system. And once we have some confidence in the repeatability and reliability of these stories, we then share them with the health system and with patients so we can all make better decisions.
I know resources will be there. Economic recovery will happen. So but right now we just have to worry about the aftermath and take care of each other, take care of our country, take care of our province, take care of our nations. And then at the end of the tunnel, we'll be back to where we were. But then this should be a wake-up call to everyone across Canada, across the world. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of being prepared.
I'm very proud of our staff. We did, during that period of time, 26,600 and such wellness checks. So our community felt supported. They were called constantly to ensure just every single day someone out there was getting a call from Wabano saying, how are you doing? What do you need? And what is it that we can do to make your life better?
With everything that has been thrown at us, we built a strong security system within the community. All the checkpoints were shut down. The nursing staff, the medical staff of Pastrac was beefed up. We had the military on some and still do where needed as needed. I believe we were one of the first in Canada to call in the Canadian military, and they responded very quickly and effectively, and very thankful for that.
It's important that we ring the alarm bell about what's happening in Toronto. There's been thousands of cases of Indigenous people getting COVID-19, and right now, to serve a population of about 70,000 people, that's about how many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit are in Toronto. There are 2 part-time clinics, and they are doing incredible work out of Anishinaabe Health and the Aduje Clinic, but they're getting so tired. And there's a wonderful network of urban Indigenous organizations that are just working around the clock to help people, keep people safe, and ensure they have access to the vaccine.
We had a lot of thanks and gratitude from the communities for coming and for providing vaccine, but the thanks and gratitude really went both ways. And we had team members who used words like this was life-changing for them, that this was a highlight of their career to be able to go into these communities and contribute in a positive and preventative fashion. This was an opportunity to interact with the communities in a completely different way, in a positive way. We're able to build some really strong relationships. And really, we are thankful and grateful, and we feel privileged to have been invited into the communities to participate in something so monumental.
To date, and I'm really excited to share this number actually. So to date, VIO volunteers has been able to give just over 1.6 million masks, 9,450 face shields, 7,662 liters of hand sanitizer to 174 Indigenous communities and 32 organizations in 7 provinces. Thank you very much to all of our supporters, to FNHMA, to NationTalk for having us on here and helping us spread the word.
And I think that this is one of the first times that I've seen a truly strong attempt at an equitable rollout for a vaccine, for healthcare services, for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people living on reserve. My goal is really to see as many of our people continue to thrive through this. And I know that there is so much more than just social distancing. You know, it has been really hard for us. It's been a really hard year and a half, and we're going to get through it, but we we've just got to keep working together to get there. So I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you very much.
I really want to thank all the healthcare workers, and not just in Ottawa. I mean, I've seen it all across this province and country. Physicians, nurses, housekeepers. We're very fortunate to have people rally like they rally. And they have done a remarkable job. But I think part of as we come out of this is people truly need a break. And so part of what we're looking to do in the summer is get people away, get them into some holidays, get them back into a sustainable work-life balance, and try and resume some level of normalcy as we head into the fall.
It was important from the start to look at the program, look at a program that included DHO people as participants, as staff, to have Indigenous people working with us, to be on the land, and of course to deliver a program that was safe and that adhered to COVID protocols.
We did this in -30 for a week, so we had participants truly learning to survive on the land. That was a part of it. That was a huge part of it, of what the program was. You know, it really is survival, working together. It was not fun being up every hour to put wood into that wood stove, but you had to, and everyone looked after each other. And again, that's what these land-based programs do. They put the responsibility on individuals to have to survive and look out for each other. And you're going to grow from that, I think, regardless. So
when you wear a mask, you're protecting yourself and others. When you wash your hands, you're protecting yourself and others. When you keep a moose length, a fishing rod length away, a deer length, you are protecting yourself and others. So let's stick to the scientific data that keeps us safe. Get your flu vaccination.
Yes, and I think it's a moose length, not a deer length. Unless you have humongous deer where you live. Our deer here are really small.
That's true. That's true. And don't get too close to the moose either was another. Keep safe.
I just want to say thank you again, Marion, for allowing us and inviting us to come on live with what's happening in Pegasus Polar.
Thank you, Marian. It's always a pleasure. I'm so excited to be here today, and I want to thank you again for inviting me to be a part of the town hall.
Well, thank you so much, Marian. As always, it is such a real pleasure to be with you and the whole town hall team, and to have this opportunity to join you all on behalf of Indigenous Services Canada to share some COVID-related statistics for First Nations on reserve for the town hall today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Marian. I'm so happy to be here today.
Thank you for joining us, and hi.
Until next week, stay safe, stay healthy, hi.
What a reflection. 121 guests, many of those guests returning, over 3,000 hours of editing time and 49 hours of live shows. Let's continue to reflect back through tears of laughter, of joy, of grief, of pain, of sorrow, with humility all the way. Can you, Dr. Hopkins, come on in and let's reflect back on one specific inbox question.
So here's the question for Carol. Carol, I have a drug dependency. I'm 100% stressed with the months of lockdown on top of the mental health issues I already know I have. This new reality leads me to wanting to escape even more. To add to my challenges, the borders are closed and the quality of the drugs that I am purchasing are getting worse. All this said, I do want to live through this time and don't want to die over an unsure and unsafe supply. Are there strategies out there to ensure we all get through this? And to the person who put this, again, I lift you up during your time of need. And thank you for having the trust to put this forward in such a public forum, because you are going to touch somebody else's life by having the courage that we just talked about to ask this. So I will pick up my tears and go over to Carol and to Brenda. Leila, chime in, but let's talk about what this person is facing.
Thank you so much for the question. And I just want to honor all of the strength that I heard in your question and your comment. Your statement of "I want to live" is the most important statement in what you shared with us. I want to live. I want you to live. And I want you to be able to access what you need to live every day. And, you know, sometimes we get into thinking long-term answers, but in situations where we are struggling with mental health, where we are struggling moment to moment with all that our body is experiencing because of the dependency to the drugs that we use, it's not possible to think long-term. Your focus is right now. And the focus for right now is your physical safety, to make sure it matches your intention to live to the future.
I thought of was sometimes we find ourselves using, even when we don't. That intention to be alive is critically important. We've lost way too many people to accidental overdose as a result of drug use and not knowing what is in the drugs. So please make sure you don't use alone. Have a circle of trusted, caring people who will make sure that you are okay. Have a naloxone kit with you. Make sure that you have that. And to know how to use it. Make sure you get safe supplies of the drugs that you use to avoid further physical problems from your drug use, and use that. And if you find that you cannot have a circle of people around you when you use, then I'm suggesting that there are lines out there that you can call when you're using. And the one that I found, because there's a few, some are more local and provincial, but there is a national one called the National Overdose Response Service. You can call that line and tell somebody that you're going to use, and they will stay on the line with you and make sure that you are safe when you are using. And that intention to stay alive, I would say each and every day, give gratitude for your life, because Creator sees a special purpose for you. And so pray every day, as Carol has said, with your tobacco. Give gratitude for your life. Give gratitude for the decisions you're going to make for that day, and make only decisions for that day. Don't make a decision for tomorrow. Make it, and if that's too much to make it for the day, make it for the half a day or the hour or the 10 minutes. Whatever it takes, make only simple decisions that save your life and allow you to honor your life each and every day. All of those other parts around the struggles with mental health will be heard through prayer. When you are ready for those other parts, they will come. But for now, it is about just giving gratitude for your life and reminding yourself that every decision is about living life. Thanks.
Brenda, there's nothing more to add. I mean, that's what's going to carry us out. And you know what? This is, I think, Town Hall number 26. And this is why we're here. This is why we bring together the network of people to support you. Everyone listening, everybody watching, to get your questions answered. And I think today we may have saved a life or two.
Waywanabo show. No shamandish na cause gaye mainga and dodem. Lene lanape quayendo, lanape king and donjaba. Greetings and thank you again for the invitation to come and join you in the Crow's Nest once again as we finish up this final season. And I have to say, I'm so thankful for all that the First Nations Health Managers Association has been able to communicate to First Nations populations across this country and to many of our allies who have tuned in to listen. I want to acknowledge that I'm in my home territory of the Delaware Nation in southwestern Ontario. And wherever you are joining from whatever land that you call home, want to give thanks and honor our mother, the earth, for she's looked after our ancestors. She's looked after the children for many years until it was time for them to be discovered. And we're in that time now. We're in that truth-telling time. And we're in the time of renewal. In the spring, we know that our mother, the earth, our first and our true mother, she brings forth the very first foods, which are the berries. And the berries are so important for our wellness, our overall wellness. I want to acknowledge an elder who walked this earth for many years. Acuanini was his name. And Peter O'Chise was his English name. And he talked about the berries as so important for many reasons, but he talked about the berries as important for addressing the harms from addictions. He said that at one time, when our people in the past, our ancestors, that they faced pandemics and they faced all of the hardships that this world offers, that they survived with a commitment to their original teachings and to their original stories. And one of those stories is specifically about the berries. And I mentioned them because it's the strawberry season. With every spring comes the strawberries, the first one of all of the berries. And I encourage you to spend time with your elders in your communities, with the storytellers in your communities. Spend time with your families to understand how they related to the berries of their land and what they did. What were their cultural practices that helped them to pick that very important medicine? As we come out of this pandemic and we look to the future, it's going to be unfolding. The coming out and the recovery is going to be unfolding over many, many months and the next few years. And at this time of renewal, this time of truth telling, we are in a state of trauma and grief. And we know from our conversations with First Nations communities that trauma, unresolved grief, is the number one reason that leads people to a dependency on opioids and methamphetamines. They are 3 times more likely to develop a dependency that causes them to use opioids and methamphetamines in a harmful way. And you saw from the video, one of the most harmful ways is that they succumb to the poisoned drugs that they consume, not knowing that they're poison. People who use drugs are intelligent. They're very smart people. They're very kind, and they use the drugs in unity with their peers because they are trying to stay safe. They have no intention to die, as we heard from that message. They don't want to die, but they have a dependency, and they for years have survived with no resources to address the trauma, no resources to address the unresolved grief. Maybe they've been separated from their family and community. For sure, they may have been separated from their culture, from their land, and from their language. Those life-giving sources can sustain life. And we know that people who do well in recovery do well because there is community support. Communities who have great partnerships with clinicians, with physicians and nurse practitioners outside of the community, delivering services to people in the community makes a huge difference, because they are not only dealing with the person who is using drugs, they are supporting their families. They're helping their families to also understand the impacts of dependency on drugs such as opioids and methamphetamines. They're having conversations with chief and council to help them understand the impacts of those drugs and what services can be beneficial. And I want to acknowledge the elders and cultural practitioners who have worked alongside those clinicians. They're so critically important. We've heard through treatment centers, the National Native Alcohol and Drug Abuse Program and the National Youth Solvent Abuse Program, that have continued to offer virtual services to people who are seeking some form of treatment, that land continues to be a significant factor. Culture continues to be a significant culture. And in fact, treatment centers have seen, through their virtual delivery of service, teaching people about culture, teaching people about the meaning and the purpose of being connected to land, helps people to grow their wellness, grow their hope, their sense of belonging, having an understanding about the meaning of their life and having a sense of purpose of their life. It grows anywhere from 9 to 15% through virtual services. Through connection on the land, we have data that tells us that that connection to the land can improve their wellness as much as 23%, just in a short amount of time, because it offers that environment that is true to their identity and helps them to start their journey of recovery. I can't emphasize enough the importance of having a safe supply of drugs. There are programs that are being evaluated for safer supply of drugs, pharmaceutical grade heroin, that can help people who have a dependency on opioids and can avoid the drug poisoning that causes death. And for people who are using methamphetamines and have a dependency on methamphetamines, we know also from our conversations with communities that a connection, having a meaningful relationship to mentors, role models, family, and community can save people's lives. That's all. When you think about all of the needs that people have who use drugs, connection is number one. Connection to culture, having a belief in tomorrow, having a belief that their life has meaning. It helps to turn that story around, that I don't belong here, that I'm of no worth because I'm an Indigenous person. Turning that belief around, reaching out with kindness to say, you belong in our community. There's a place for you in our community. I want to support you in your journey to recovery and addressing that unresolved grief and trauma. It can be a significant beginning to not only reducing the harms of people who use drugs, but also the harms to the overall community, harms to the family. I want to say, greetings to all of our relatives across Turtle Island, and acknowledge you as relatives, that we have to understand that we are related and we can support each other. Our relationships have meaning. And I encourage you, again, 3 times more likely not to use opioids and methamphetamines in a harmful way, just through having those connections. And those connections can save lives. Enjoy the summer. Dance across this land. Sing those beautiful songs in our language. Celebrate life. Mewene, miigwech.
Carol, I don't know whether to cry or be happy. I'm just so emotional about all of the things that everyone has been going through, accomplishing, but there is hope. Dr. Brenda Ristool, come on into the crow's nest. And I'll just unmute. We want to hear your messages of hope and resilience, meaning and purpose.
Thanks, Marion. Wow. Ani Bojo, Wapsequence Dijnakas, Magisi Dodem, Oki Kenda Dunjaba, Anishinaabe Yandao, Akin, Debendigo Sakin. I just want to thank you, Marion, for inviting me as well back into the crow's nest, and to just say a big heartfelt chimigwech to all of our frontline workers, to our cultural practitioners, and to our family members who have taken the time to care for each other and to ensure that we live another day, to ensure that our communities remain strong, and to find all of the teachings within their land, within their stories, and within their cultural practices that they may have been doing on their own, because all of that builds resilience. And I really appreciate what Carol had to say, because she reminded us that we, each and every person in our community has a purpose, and that we need to connect and support them to find that purpose. And I was thinking about, how have we got to where we are, recognizing that in today, we have been exposed around continued harms and griefs and traumas. And beyond that, one of the things that we've read is that those little people who were lost to us have been uncovered and found, and that they have planted seeds for us. And those are seeds, I think, of resiliency. And they tell us about the possibility of hope, and that they have felt that we can be connected to them, that we can have meaning and we can have purpose because we belong to the land, we belong to our families, we belong to our communities. And for me, when I think about holistic resiliency, and I think about what that means as Indigenous people, I'm reminded in listening to all of the information that Valerie gave, that we have strong, caring, and supportive communities, that we immediately responded with, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we ensure that we are going to protect each other? And sometimes that was by border closures, sometimes that was about bringing food in. But in all of those situations, the thing that I heard was that we all had a strong belief in our success to get through this together. So when we have strong and supportive communities, we have that ability to have high expectations for our successes in taking care of each other and recovering and being resilient. And I think what we heard and saw in our communities, whether it was attending to COVID or attending to the traumas that we've heard with these most recent discoveries of the unmarked graves that we all knew about, was those opportunities for all of us to be meaningfully engaged and to participate in taking care of our communities. So being fire keepers, dropping off groceries, making phone calls, those were all critically important. And what they've created is strong, positive, caring, kind bonds of connection. And when we have that, we are able to be very clear about our boundaries and be consistent. So those boundaries of our community, we set those and we made sure that we protected the people in our communities, who was coming in, who was leaving, and why. But we also had those boundaries as frontline workers about who do we need to take care of? How do we do that? What are the things we need? Whether we were asking of that from the Crown and the government, or we were asking that internally of ourselves, of our leadership, what do we need and how do we need to get there? And in all of that, what we saw by bringing people back to connection of land, to teaching them about the medicines, to teaching them about our practices that we could do, was those skills, the skills that we either had, that our grandmas, our Gokmis and our Nokchimis gave us, or the ones that we have discovered in our own journeys. And through all of that, we've created strong, healthy self-identities around culture. And most important, I heard through all of this, was language, our use and our connection of language. How many of our people returned to learning language at this time, whether it was on the land, through Zoom, through many ways. We've heard more push and practice for using our language to help us to be strong and resilient. And because language gives us that value of shaping relationships, it builds a sense of belonging in our communities, it creates opportunities for forming our identity. It promotes stability, tolerance, belonging, and balanced thinking. And it helps us to develop strong executive functioning so that we can be good problem solvers and figure out what is the next steps for recovery. You know, through all of this time, there has been fears. We have been afraid of what we don't know. We have been afraid of losing more of our families, more of our community members. We've been afraid of not being given equal access. We've been afraid to recognize that the gaps put us in vulnerabilities. But I think through all of that, there are three key messages, and Carol mentioned them and Valerie mentioned them. That was about having kindness towards each other who don't know what they need, who are unable to gather and find the strength or the courage to face some of their challenges and their trauma. When we have kindness, we give them that sense of belonging and that sense of purpose by showing them that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And we need to have acceptance that they are where they are right now, but that if we continue to invest and nurture them through culture, through land, through language, that we can help them connect to their sense of life purpose, to that meaning of being alive. And finally, to have courage to face things together, to be able to recognize that we all play a part in that braid of life, that we are stronger together than apart. And I want to end by thinking about a legend that I was thinking about. And I know, Marion, you like when I have them, so I was kind of trying to think of one. And my son's spirit name is of the Northern Lights. And this was one, so it's a bit of a connection to kids, to our children and to our future. And it's the legend of the Northern Lights. And I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to tell you briefly that it talks about the salmon and the white bear, and the white bear as having infinite wisdom and healing. And he came to the waters and he said to the salmons, look to the light and look to swim to the top of the great mountain. And there you will find home in eternal light. The salmon really questioned their ability to do this. They didn't think they had the strength, but he said to them, if you look upward and fight onward, you can conquer the great mountain. So there were some of those who chose to follow the words of the bear, and they swam upwards and they swam onwards. Some of them got tired and they turned back, and some of them got discouraged because it was such a long and hard swim. But they looked up to the heavens, and what they saw there was a light. Those light was filled with glittering stars, and they were reminded of the bear's promise that if they did this, they would find eternal light. And so that gave them energy and it gave them hope. And they continued to move forward. And as they did that, it changed the salmon into these beautiful colors of red and yellow and silver. And they began to have hope. And they noticed that then they were at the top of the mountain and they could touch the skies. And it was like an eternal river. They wanted to be part of this, but they didn't know how to do that. They looked below them and they saw those who were lost and wandering because they were so lost. And the bear reappeared and it encouraged them. It said, I encourage you to become a light for all of those who are lost. So in that moment, they let go of their doubts and their fears for what they truly wanted. And when they did that, they became part of the Northern Lights. and they were full of light and life, and they became a river of light to guide the way for those who would wander in darkness. And so I think it's a beautiful metaphor for all of our frontline workers, all of our allies who have been that light in the time of darkness. We have worked together to be that beautiful, shining northern light that tells us that we are resilient, we are here, and we will recover together. Miigwech.
Upwards and onwards. And in that thanks and gratitude, let's take a look back at the FNHMA celebration, thanking all of you.
Thank you to the devoted health workers who are steering us through not only the COVID-19 pandemic, but also many other problems that have only been exacerbated by the virus. We have never needed you more. You keep us safe while putting yourselves in harm's way each day. We thank you and we honor you.
Today, we thank Indigenous healthcare workers across the country. This year hasn't been easy for anyone, and I know that it's been particularly tough for those working on the front lines in this fight against COVID-19. We're also celebrating the newly certified health directors who've achieved the First Nations Healthcare Managers Association designation. This is a challenging but important time to get involved in healthcare. So thank you for stepping up, and congratulations on your new certification.
Hi, I'm Buffy St. Marie, sending a shout out all across Canada to all of the healthcare workers who are serving in First Nations and Indigenous communities across the country. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Merci beaucoup. Niawe, kinanaskomiten, kichimigwech. Thank you. You guys are one of our most important survival tools. And for everybody who's not a healthcare worker, why don't you use your #1 survival tool? Mask up, protect them, protect me, protect you and everybody else. Mask up, people.
Hey everyone, Carey Price here. I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of the healthcare and frontline workers for their courageous efforts in keeping us safe and keeping us going on a daily basis. I hope the very best for you and your families. Keep up the great work and stay safe out there. Together we'll get through this. Take care, everyone.
And the final comment in all of this goes to Twin Flames. Hi, hi.
Put in our place, told we'd belong. Scared to speak up, scared we'd be wrong. What if in that moment we stood tall? Refused to surrender, refused to fall.